What if I told you that everything you believed about winter survival is an absolute lie? Imagine a world where the cold is so fierce that your own breath freezes in midair and falls to the ground with a metallic clink. This isn't a scene from a science fiction movie. It's the harsh reality in which indigenous peoples have lived for centuries. Where a modern person in the most expensive gear would die of hypothermia in just a couple of hours, these people felt right at home. In winter, the Canadian prairies turned into an endless, icy desert where the thermometer regularly plunged below -50 degrees. In this white hell, the slightest mistake cost a life, and the wind could strip the skin from your face in a matter of minutes. But how is it possible not just to survive, but to truly thrive, hunt, and raise children in conditions that resemble the surface of Mars more than Earth? We've grown accustomed to thinking that surviving such cold is only possible within heated concrete walls. But the ancient nomads of the North knew secrets that completely overturn our understanding of the human body's capabilities. How do you turn a snowdrift into a reliable shelter? And why were their clothes more effective than modern membrane jackets? Watch this video to the end, and you'll learn how indigenous peoples tamed the fury of the Arctic winds, and what tricks allowed them to stay warm in this endless, snowy hell. Get ready, this story is sure to give you goosebumps. Let's head into the icy unknown. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the world changes at -50 degrees? At such temperatures, the familiar properties of materials completely disappear. Wood becomes as brittle as thin ice and can split from a slight impact. Moist air crystallizes instantly, settling on clothing as a thick layer of frost. Ordinary water turns into solid rock faster than it can touch the ground. I discovered this by chance while studying archival records about the Canadian prairies. It turned out that the density of the frosty atmosphere made it possible to hear footsteps from a great distance. The snow cover acted as a giant resonator, amplifying every rustle and creak. The trees in the forest made loud cracking sounds due to the sap freezing inside their trunks. These sharp sounds constantly disrupted the nighttime silence of the endless snow-covered plain. The snow beneath our feet took on a completely different texture and density. It stopped sticking together and turned into a dry, crunchy, crystalline powder. Walking on such a surface was difficult, as it did not provide reliable footing. My shoes constantly slipped, requiring a specific rhythm and placement of the foot. The wind lifted these tiny crystals into the air, creating a thick, white veil right at ground level. Visual perception of space also changed dramatically in the extreme cold. Icy dust constantly hung in the air, refracting the sun's rays. This caused optical illusions that distorted the actual distances to objects. Hills and trees seemed much closer than they actually were. Only the tribe's most experienced trackers could navigate such terrain. Starting a fire became a complex science requiring patience and precision. Ordinary branches found in the snow were saturated with moisture and would not catch fire. They had to search for dry trunks, protected from snowfall by the dense canopies of coniferous trees. A spark was struck from flint onto specially prepared dry moss, which they always carried with them. This tinder was kept in small leather pouches, hidden deep beneath their clothing. Retaining the heat they generated was more important than producing it. Any shelter was built with the direction of the prevailing cold winds in mind. Entrances to dwellings were always located on the leeward side, protecting the interior from drafts. Snow served as the primary building material for erecting protective barriers around the campsite. High snowdrifts reliably blocked the flow of icy air from the living area. Life on the prairie did not come to a standstill, but it was governed by strict rules of energy conservation. Unnecessary movements were avoided, and routes were planned in advance, taking the terrain into account. Travels were undertaken during daylight hours, when the sun provided at least the illusion of warmth. Spending the night in the open field without reliable shelter was absolutely out of the question. Every action had been refined over centuries of successful survival in these harsh conditions. Survival knowledge was passed down by word of mouth without a single written record. Every detail of daily life had been honed to perfection by generations of ancestors. Mistakes in these parts came at too high a cost, so the rules were strictly followed. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I wonder how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from, and what interested you most about the physics of cold? The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the unique architecture of winter dwellings. Many people are used to thinking that the indigenous peoples of the plains always lived in light teepees. However, to survive winters at -50 degrees, the Cree built sunken earthen houses. These structures were half buried in the ground, taking advantage of the constant above-freezing temperature of the lower soil layers. Creating such a shelter required a colossal effort to dig out the frozen earth with bone shovels. The frame was built from sturdy tree trunks arranged in a dome-like shape. The gaps between the logs were tightly packed with moss, dry grass, and small shrubs. The entire structure was covered with a thick layer of turf and soil. When this earthen cap froze, it turned into an impenetrable, monolithic shell. Snow falling on the roof provided additional, ideal thermal insulation. From the outside, such a dwelling looked like an ordinary snowdrift against the backdrop of the white prairie. It could only be spotted by a small wisp of smoke rising from a ventilation hole. The entrance was a long, narrow tunnel oriented away from the prevailing winds. This corridor acted as a thermal lock, preventing cold air from entering the main chamber. The passage was draped with several layers of heavy bison hides for maximum airtightness. Inside the earthen house, it was always dimly lit, and a constant microclimate was maintained. In the center was a small sunken hearth lined with flat stones. The fire in it never burned at full strength to avoid creating excessive smoke. The purpose of the hearth was slow smoldering, providing a steady flow of gentle heat. The stones around the fire heated up and radiated warmth into the room during long, cold nights. The floor of the dwelling was covered with a thick layer of coniferous branches, creating an air layer above the ground. Tanned animal hides were laid on top of the branches, fur side up. Sleeping areas were located on small raised platforms along the walls, where the warmest air accumulated. This layout allowed an entire family to be comfortably accommodated inside. Even during the harshest frosts, the temperature inside rarely dropped below a comfortable level. Building such a house took several weeks of hard work by the entire community. Earthwork began long before the first serious cold snap. The construction site was chosen in low-lying areas or near dense forests. The forest served as a natural barrier against destructive winter blizzards. Each new generation reused the old pits, simply renewing the wooden frame and roof. People spent the longest and darkest months of the year in these shelters. Here they mended clothes, made new tools, and prepared food supplies for future journeys. Thick earthen walls completely insulated the inhabitants from the howling wind outside. It was a safe haven, offering confidence in the future. The warmth of the hearth and the scent of pine needles created a sense of coziness in the middle of the icy desert. Such structures represented the pinnacle of architectural ingenuity among the peoples of cold regions. They combined the availability of materials with the highest energy efficiency. Without these shelters, surviving the winters of the Canadian prairies would have been impossible. Do you agree that dugouts were the most reliable shelter of that time? Stay tuned for the next chapter to find out how they obtained water when everything around them turned to ice. Something you've never seen before lies in ancient methods of obtaining drinking water. In winter, the prairies were buried in snow, but getting water from it was incredibly difficult. If you simply filled a clay pot with snow and placed it over a fire, the pot would shatter from the temperature shock. The Cree developed a completely different approach, utilizing the laws of thermodynamics without knowing their scientific name. They used birch bark containers, which they never placed directly over an open flame. They heated the water using special hot stones taken from the fire. The stones were selected very carefully, excluding rocks that could explode when heated. Smooth river pebbles were heated until red hot in the central hearth of the earthen house. Then, using wooden tongs, they were carefully lowered into a birch bark container filled with snow. The snow melted instantly, sizzling as it turned into warm drinking water. Birch bark was the ideal material for such containers due to its flexibility and waterproofness. The containers were sewn together with spruce roots, and the seams were carefully coated with tree resin. Such vessels were lightweight, did not break when dropped, and did not crack in the cold. The process of heating with stones allowed for a large amount of boiling water to be obtained in just a few minutes. This method was much safer and more efficient than direct heating over a fire. Not just any snow gathered around the campsite was suitable for melting. The top loose layer contained too much air and yielded very little moisture. The inhabitants always dug through the snowdrifts down to the very bottom, dense layers of fern. This dense, compressed snow consisted of pure ice crystals. When melted, it yielded several times more water, which saved firewood and time. Sometimes, instead of birch bark, they used the stomachs of large herbivores, carefully cleaned and dried. They hung them on wooden tripods near the hearth, filling them with dense snow. The gentle heat from the fire slowly melted the contents, which had accumulated at the bottom of the bag. This method did not require the use of stones and allowed the water to melt in the background. The resulting liquid always had a slight smoky flavor, to which everyone had long since grown accustomed. Knowledge of how to properly select a stone for boiling was passed down by experienced elders. An experienced grandmother could tell by the sound of the impact whether a cobblestone would crack in the fire. Porous stones quickly absorbed moisture and shattered into dangerous shards. Monolithic rocks withstood hundreds of heating and cooling cycles. Every family had its own set of tried and true stones, which they carried with them. In temperatures below 50 degrees, even hot water cooled in a matter of minutes. So they drank it right away, passing the birch bark cup around among family members. The hot liquid was not just a way to quench thirst, but also a source of internal warmth. It warmed the esophagus and stomach, driving blood through frozen veins. This ritual of drinking together united people and lifted their spirits. The technique of heating with stones was a true breakthrough in adapting to the cold. It allowed people to do without fragile ceramics and heavy metal cauldrons. Natural materials were transformed into perfect tools in the hands of skilled people. Resourcefulness and observation became the key to conquering the harsh northern lands. Please like this video if you're amazed by such incredible engineering solutions from the past. A secret passed down from generation to generation concerns the survival of their main helpers. The arrival of horses on the plains completely transformed the culture of many tribes, but winter became a harsh test for these steeds. Keeping large herbivores alive at -50 degrees was an incredibly difficult task. Unlike the local bison, horses did not have a thick, protective undercoat. People had to come up with ingenious ways to keep their transportation from freezing. To protect them from the icy wind, the horses were covered with special blankets. These blankets were sewn from thick bison hides, with the fur left on the inside. The blanket covered the animal's back, sides, and hindquarters, retaining most of the heat generated. The edges were securely fastened with leather straps under the belly to prevent them from being blown away by gusts of wind. Such protection allowed the animals to endure nighttime frosts without critical consequences to their health. Campsites were always set up in areas with natural windbreaks. Dense willow thickets or deep river canyons served as reliable shelter for the herds. If natural protection was insufficient, people built high snow berms around the horses' resting areas. These barriers reduced the wind speed at ground level to practically zero. Inside such a snow enclosure, the temperature was several degrees higher than on the open prairie. Traveling through deep snow quickly exhausted any mode of transport. To avoid exhaustion, trails between campsites were trampled out in advance. A group of people on wide snowshoes would walk the route several times, compacting the loose snow. Only on such a prepared path could the pack animals be led. This significantly conserved energy and prevented leg injuries from the icy crust. In severe cold, the condition of the hooves was monitored with particular care. Ice and crusted snow could easily damage an unprotected hoof, making movement impossible. Before long treks, the hooves were lubricated with melted animal fat. The fat repelled moisture and prevented snow from sticking, forming heavy ice clumps. This simple procedure maintained the group's mobility throughout the entire arduous journey. Watering also required human intervention, as all streams froze solid to the bottom. Deep holes were cut into the ice of lakes and rivers using heavy stone axes. The edges of the holes were carefully cleared of sharp shards so the animals would not injure themselves. Access to liquid water was critical for digesting dry winter food. Without regular watering, digestion would stop, leading to rapid losses in the herd. The attitude toward these companions was deeply pragmatic, yet imbued with respect. Losing a pack animal in the middle of winter meant almost certain death for the entire family. Therefore, caring for them was often prioritized over the rider's own comfort. The effort expended on setting up pens and gathering fodder was enormous. This labor ensured the tribe's survival and mobility in conditions of absolute isolation. Thanks to these measures, people could traverse vast distances even during the coldest time of the year. Transportation management techniques were constantly refined to adapt to the climate. This allowed them to maintain connections between scattered groups and exchange resources. How difficult do you think it was to build such shelters with their bare hands? In the next chapter, you'll learn how people protected themselves with unique clothing. The layered clothing of indigenous peoples was a highly sophisticated engineering design for retaining heat. The basic principle was to create several insulated air pockets between the body and the external environment. Air is the worst conductor of cold, and this property was utilized to maximum effect. A soft shirt made of tanned antelope or deer hide was worn directly against the skin. This hide was tanned so finely that it felt like modern, high-quality fabric. The second layer was a thick shirt made of bison hide, worn with the fur facing inward. The long pile created that all-important air cushion around the torso. The seams on such clothing were made exclusively with sinew threads extracted from the spines of large animals. In the cold, the tendons contracted, making the seam completely airtight and windproof. This property of natural materials surpassed any modern synthetic thread in reliability. The design of the sleeves was also thought out down to the smallest detail to preserve heat in the limbs. The sleeves were made long, completely covering the hands when lowered. When it was necessary to work with one's hands, the sleeves were simply rolled up to the desired height. Fringe made of thin strips of leather was often sewn onto the edges. This fringe served not as decoration, but as a functional element to wick away excess moisture from the seams. Head protection was provided by deep hoods, integrated into the outer cloak. The edges of the hood were trimmed with thick fox or coyote fur. This fluffy rim broke up the cold wind, creating a zone of calm air in front of the face. Thanks to this, the face did not freeze even in strong headwinds. In particularly severe frosts, the face was additionally covered with a piece of soft leather, leaving only a narrow slit for the eyes. The main danger of wearing warm clothing was sweating during vigorous activity. Frozen sweat instantly turned warm clothing into an icy shell, leading to hypothermia. Therefore, during heavy work, such as chopping wood, the outer layers of clothing were always removed. A person would remain only in a thin undershirt, allowing the body to freely evaporate moisture. As soon as the work was finished, the fur cape was immediately put back on to retain residual heat. Footwear known as moccasins was made using a special technique for winter. They were sewn with the seams on the outside so that the interior was completely smooth and did not rub against the foot. A special insole, woven from dry wormwood or cedar bark, was inserted inside the moccasin. This plant-based lining excellently absorbed excess moisture and provided additional thermal insulation from below. At night, the insoles were always removed and thoroughly dried near the hearth. Mittens were sewn from the thickest pieces of leather and fitted with a separate strap. This strap was looped around the neck so the mittens could not be lost in the snow. Losing a mitten at -50 degrees meant frostbite of the hand within 20 minutes. Inside, they were lined with the softest rabbit down, which excellently retained the warmth of the fingers. The mittens were always made in one piece, without separate fingers, which minimized heat loss. This entire outfit could weigh over 10 kilograms. However, the weight was distributed evenly across the body, making it quite comfortable to wear. People could run, hunt, and perform complex tasks while encased in fur armor. Every item of clothing had a strictly functional purpose, proven by generations. This complex system of thermoregulation was the key to survival in the conditions of a never-ending winter. What lies behind the idyllic image of life in the wild is a constant struggle for calories. At -50 degrees, the human body burns energy at a tremendous rate just to stay warm. Ordinary food was not enough. Fuel of a completely different quality and density was required. The main secret to winter survival was food consisting almost entirely of fat and protein. This product became a true energy reservoir, allowing people to survive long months without a successful hunt. This superfood was pemmican, a concentrate unmatched in its nutritional value. The process of making it began as early as autumn, during the mass harvesting of meat. The meat was cut into thin strips and dried in the sun until it became as brittle as cardboard. Then these dry strips were ground into a fine powder using stones, breaking down the tough fibers. The resulting meat powder became the ideal base for long-term storage. In addition to pemmican, pure rendered fat played an important role in the winter diet. It was consumed in its pure form, spread on thin flatbreads, or added to boiling water. The fat created a protective film on the stomach lining and provided an instant burst of calories. On the coldest nights, people would eat a few spoonfuls of fat before bed. This triggered a powerful digestive process that warmed the body from the inside, much like a small stove. The diet was extremely monotonous, but perfectly balanced for the extreme climate. It contained virtually no carbohydrates, so the body adapted to derive energy exclusively from fats. This diet helped avoid sharp spikes in blood sugar and the associated bouts of weakness. A person's endurance on such a diet increased significantly, allowing for long treks across the snow. The metabolism adapted to the cold, converting every morsel eaten into pure energy. Fresh meat was rarely obtained in winter and was considered a true celebration for the community. Hunting in deep snow required enormous amounts of energy, which might not always pay off. If they did manage to catch an animal, not a single gram of the carcass was wasted. The internal organs, rich in vitamins that protected people from disease, were eaten. Even the bones were ground up and boiled repeatedly to extract the remaining nutritious bone marrow. Storing supplies was organized with maximum protection from predators. Bags of pemmican were hung on high wooden platforms or buried deep in the snow. These hiding places were located near the dwelling, so they were always quickly accessible. Keeping strict records and rationing supplies was the responsibility of the older women in the family. They were the ones who calculated the daily portion so that there would be enough food until the first spring grass appeared. During harsh winters, when supplies were running low, reserve food sources were tapped. People gathered old bones, stripped the fur from the hides, and boiled them for a long time in water. The resulting sticky broth provided minimal calories but helped stave off hunger. Using the bark of certain trees also helped them stretch things out for a few extra days. Discipline and the ability to endure hardship were instilled in every member of the tribe from birth. Food was not merely a way to satisfy hunger, but the primary mechanism for generating heat. A proper diet saved lives more reliably than even the thickest fur blankets. Survival depended on how successfully the tribe had worked in the fall. Could you have lasted on such a meager ration for 6 months? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they solved the problem of keeping the fire going when the forest turned to glass. Gathering and maintaining a fire in the harsh winter became a continuous, exhausting labor. In severe frosts, the structure of the wood changed beyond recognition. Living trees froze solid through and through, their trunks filled with ice crystals and became as hard as stone. Chopping such wood with a bone axe was practically impossible. The blade would simply bounce off the trunk. Therefore, gathering firewood required entirely different approaches and a deep understanding of the properties of various tree species. First and foremost, they looked for dead wood, trees that had dried out while still rooted before winter set in. There was no frozen sap in them, so their wood remained relatively pliable. However, finding dead wood under deep snow in the forest was a difficult task. They had to rely on the shape of the crowns and the absence of buds on the branches. Once a dry tree was found, it was carefully felled and sawed into logs convenient for transport. Firewood was delivered to the camp on special sleds made from smooth branches. These sleds glided easily over the snow crust and allowed heavy logs to be transported with minimal effort. Gathering firewood was a daily duty in which all able-bodied family members participated. Each day, a single earthen dwelling burned a colossal amount of wood to maintain the temperature. The fuel supply always had to exceed current needs by at least double in case of a sudden blizzard. Different types of wood were used for the central hearth, depending on the desired result. Softwoods, such as poplar or pine, produced a quick and hot flame. They were used in the morning to quickly warm the room after a cold night. Hardwoods, such as oak or ash, burned slowly and released a tremendous amount of heat. These were the ones placed in the fire at night to ensure a steady smolder until dawn. Building a fire began with preparing the right foundation on the cold floor. A thick layer of damp branches was laid on the ground to serve as thermal insulation. This prevented the heat from the fire from melting the frozen ground and turning the floor into a muddy puddle. On top of this cushion, dry kindling and tinder were laid out, onto which a spark was struck. Only after a steady flame appeared were large logs carefully added to the hearth. Smoke was a serious problem inside the enclosed space of an earthen house. If the firewood was damp, it would smoke uncontrollably, stinging the eyes and making it hard to breathe. Therefore, all firewood was dried inside the dwelling before being placed in the hearth. It was stacked in neat piles along the walls, where it gradually lost excess moisture. This process took several days, requiring constant rotation of the logs. Preserving the embers was a true art, passed down from generation to generation. If the fire went out, rekindling it took precious time and effort. To keep the heat, before bedtime the embers were raked tightly into a pile and covered with a layer of warm ash. In this state, the fire could smolder for more than 10 hours without adding new fuel. In the morning, it was enough to stir up the ashes and throw in a handful of dry grass for the flames to flare up again. During long treks across the prairie, fires were built using a completely different method. In the open field, the fire was quickly blown out by the wind before it could warm the people. Therefore, the fire was built in a deep pit dug into the dense snow. The snow walls reflected heat back into the pit, creating a comfortable resting area. Such trench fires allowed for safe overnight stays even during severe blizzards. When firewood was scarce, alternative fuel sources were used. Dry bison dung, collected on the prairie, burned for a long time and gave off intense heat. It did not spark and produced almost no smoke, which was a huge advantage. These natural briquettes were stockpiled continuously until the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow. Bison dung was stored in dry alcoves, forming a strategic reserve for the harshest period of winter. Fire was the heart of any camp, a symbol of life and safety. It warded off nightmares, warmed food, and dried wet clothes. All the social life of the community revolved around the central hearth, where stories and legends were shared. Maintaining this fragile source of heat was the very reason for existence in the icy wilderness. Losing control of the fire was tantamount to the destruction of the entire tribe. Navigating the snow-covered prairie during winter was a task of phenomenal difficulty. When the ground was covered by a solid white blanket, all familiar landmarks vanished. Hills merged with the horizon, and riverbeds became indistinguishable beneath a thick layer of ice and snow. In cloudy weather or during a blizzard, a whiteout would occur, when the sky and the ground merged into one. A person would completely lose their sense of depth and direction, which led to fatal mistakes. A deep, almost intuitive understanding of the terrain's micro-relief served as a lifeline. Experienced trackers paid attention to the shapes of snowdrifts, ridges blown up by the wind. In the Canadian prairies, winter storms blow predominantly from one direction. By studying the slope and density of these snow waves, a person could accurately determine the cardinal directions. This compass was always at their feet and was not affected by cloud cover. Animal behavior also provided valuable clues for navigation. Birds that remained for the winter concentrated in low-lying areas with dense shrubbery. By observing the direction of their flight, one could locate forest areas hidden beneath the snow. The tracks of large ungulates always led to food sources or natural shelters. Reading these tracks served as a substitute for the most detailed topographic maps. On clear nights, the starry sky served as a guide, shining incredibly brightly in the frosty air. Every hunter knew the constellations by heart from early childhood. The North Star pointed north, allowing them to adjust their route after a long day's journey. The moon's movement helped track time and plan campsites. Night navigation was often more reliable than daytime navigation due to the absence of blinding sunlight. The severe frost created special optical phenomena that helped with navigation over long distances. Warm air rising from the camp formed a tall column of steam, visible for many kilometers. This unique smoke beacon allowed hunters to find their way home without fail. The light from the campfires reflected off low clouds of icy dust, creating a faint glow above the camp. Such markers were vital in the endless, monotonous plain. When a blizzard approached, all travel was immediately halted. Experienced people understood that fighting the elements in the open field was futile. The group quickly built a snow shelter or hid in natural depressions in the terrain. They waited out the storm, huddling close together to stay warm. Any attempt to reach the camp blindly always ended in disorientation and death. To mark important trails and food caches, they used stone pyramids, inuksuks. These man-made landmarks were built from large boulders on high ground. Outwardly, they often resembled a human figure with arms outstretched. Inuksuks were not covered by snow and were clearly visible against the backdrop of the white prairie. They served as reliable road signs for all travelers in these lands. Memory of the landscapes was constantly trained, turning the brain into a complex navigational instrument. Every twisted tree, every distinctive bend in the canyon was memorized forever. During the summer migrations, people mentally imagined what this terrain would look like under the snow. The ability to extrapolate the summer landscape onto the winter reality was a sign of mastery. This mental map never failed and was never lost. If a person did lose their bearings, there was a strict protocol to follow. It was forbidden to panic and wander aimlessly across the prairie, wasting the last of one's energy. One had to stop immediately, build a small fire, and wait for help. Search parties from the camp always followed the tracks left behind before the wind could sweep them away. Discipline and cold calculation saved the lost better than any instincts. Navigating in the whiteout was not just a skill, but an art of survival. It required absolute unity with nature and an understanding of its subtlest signals. A mistake in choosing a direction cost not only the hunter's life, but also that of his family, who were waiting for the catch. Only respect for the elements and the knowledge of their ancestors allowed them to find the right path through the icy labyrinth. These priceless skills were passed down by word of mouth over many centuries. At temperatures below 50 degrees, the functionality of everyday tools changed dramatically. Materials that worked perfectly in the summer became useless or even dangerous in the winter. As already mentioned, metal, if used at all, would stick to the skin and shatter upon impact. Therefore, indigenous peoples relied on organic materials whose properties did not degrade in the cold. Bone, antler, and certain types of stone formed the basis of the winter technological arsenal. The main winter tool was a heavy splitting axe made from moose antler or bison jawbone. The antler possessed a unique toughness that did not diminish even under extreme cold. It did not split when striking frozen wood or thick ice. The blade of such an axe was sharpened to razor sharpness using abrasive stones. The handle was securely fastened with raw leather straps, which as they dried, tightened tightly. Skin scrapers were made from the tubular bones of large mammals. These bones were split lengthwise to create a tool with a perfect cutting edge. In winter, hide processing did not stop, as the cold naturally froze out excess moisture from the flesh side. A bone scraper glided easily over the frozen skin, removing the thinnest layer of fat. Metal equivalents quickly dulled under such conditions and tore the valuable material. Bone awls and needles were used for sewing thick winter clothing. Crafting a fine needle from bird bone was a process requiring jeweler's precision. These tools were fragile, but pierced the multi-layered leather prepared for sewing with ease. To prevent the needle from breaking in the cold, it was often held against the cheek or in a warm palm before use. A seamstress's skill was measured by the number of broken needles used to create a single fur cape. Flint knives remained indispensable for delicate work and cutting meat. Flint retained its sharpness but became more brittle in extreme cold. Therefore, frozen meat was cut using a special method, avoiding lateral stress on the blade. The knife was slowly pressed into the dense mass, using the weight of one's own body rather than arm strength. If the blade was damaged, it could be quickly chipped off to form a new sharp edge. Vehicles were also assembled exclusively using organic fasteners. Sleds and snowshoes were bound together with thin strips of rawhide or tendons. In winter, these knots froze solid and turned into monolithic joints that were just as strong as welded ones. The absence of nails made the structure flexible, capable of absorbing impacts against ice hummocks. In case of breakage, any part could be easily replaced right in the field. Long fibers from the bark of certain shrubs were actively used to make ropes. These plant-based ropes did not stiffen in the cold as much as thick leather straps. They were used to weave nets for winter ice fishing and snares for small game. The weaving technique was complex and took up long winter evenings in the earthen house. The finished ropes were regularly treated with fat to prevent them from drying out and cracking. Storing tools required following certain rules. It was forbidden to bring frozen bone or stone objects directly to a hot hearth. Sudden temperature changes caused micro cracks that destroyed the material structure. Tools were left in the cool vestibule of the dwelling, where they thawed slowly. Careful handling of the equipment extended its service life for many years. Making a new tool in winter was a long process due to the difficulty of obtaining materials. Stones were impossible to find under deep snow, and suitable wood was hidden beneath the ice. Therefore, all the necessary preparations for future tools were made during the warmer months. This stockpile of raw materials was just as important a part of preparing for winter as pemmican reserves. Without high-quality tools, the tribe's survival was quickly threatened. Ice Age technologies were an example of perfect adaptation to a hostile environment. People did not try to change nature. They used its properties to their advantage. Bone, stone, and leather became the materials that conquered the cold, barren prairies. These simple yet perfect tools allowed them to generate heat, obtain food, and build reliable shelters. The engineering of the past is striking in its rationality and waste-free nature. In extreme survival conditions, the tribe's main resource was not tools or food supplies, but knowledge. The techniques for building earthen houses, pemmican recipes, and navigation skills were not passed down genetically. This entire colossal database was stored in the memories of the community's elders. An experienced grandmother was a veritable living encyclopedia, knowing the answers to the most complex questions of survival. It was to her that people turned for advice when familiar methods ceased to work due to the vagaries of the weather. The elders' memories spanned decades of observing the climate and the behavior of nature. They remembered winters when there was no snow at all, and winters when snowdrifts hid the trees. This historical experience allowed the tribe to prepare for the most unpredictable scenarios. By the slightest changes in the shape of the clouds, the elders could predict the arrival of a devastating blizzard days in advance. Such long-term forecasting gave hunters time to return to camp before the storm began. The transfer of knowledge took place continuously during long nights spent in winter shelters. Stories told around the fire were not merely entertainment, but a rigorous educational process. Stories of successful and unsuccessful hunts contained precise instructions on how to behave on the prairie. Young hunters absorbed these rules, memorizing every nuance and every detail. The mistakes of the heroes from the legends served as a warning, helping to avoid real tragedies. The role of older women in managing resources during the winter was absolute and unquestionable. An experienced grandmother personally distributed portions of pemmican and rendered fat among family members. She knew who needed more energy for work and who could get by on a minimal ration. Her task was to stretch the supplies so that no one would die of exhaustion before spring arrived. This heavy responsibility required firmness, wisdom, and mathematical precision. Medical knowledge was also concentrated in the hands of the older generation. Frostbite, snow blindness, and colds were treated using herbs gathered in the summer and ointments made from fat. The secrets of preparing these healing concoctions were kept under the strictest secrecy and passed down only to the chosen few. In the absence of modern medicines, these natural remedies were the only chance for the sick to survive. Their effectiveness depended on the accuracy of the diagnosis made by a wise healer. The techniques for making complex winter clothing were also supervised by the elders. They monitored the quality of the skin tanning and the correct placement of the sinew stitches. The slightest flaw in the sewing of a fur cape could cost a hunter his life on the prairie. Therefore, every stage of the work was strictly inspected and redone if necessary. This quality control ensured the reliability of the entire system of protection against the cold. Respect for age in these tribes was dictated by the harsh pragmatics of survival. A person who managed to live to a ripe old age under such conditions inherently possessed unique skills. Their experience was valued above the physical strength of young hunters. The loss of an elder was equated with the loss of a priceless library of knowledge that could never be restored. Therefore, the community protected its keepers of memory at any cost, giving them the best pieces of food and warm spots by the fire. The memory of landscapes hidden beneath the snow was also the prerogative of the elders. They could draw an accurate map of the terrain in the snow from memory, indicating all streams and shelters. These mental maps saved the tribe when it was necessary to urgently change campsites due to a shortage of firewood. The ability to navigate space and time without instruments was truly remarkable. This navigational genius was forged over decades of nomadic life. Psychological support during the long months of isolation was another important function of the elders. The darkness, the cramped quarters of the earthen house, and the constant cold inevitably caused despondency and anxiety. The elders' calmness and confidence were passed on to the rest, reducing the level of tension within the group. Their voices, recounting ancient myths, created a sense of stability and order amid the chaos of the winter elements. Morale was no less important a factor in survival than warm clothing. The legacy of these peoples proves that the human mind is capable of adapting to any conditions. The information network, built on oral tradition, functioned flawlessly. Millennia of experience allowed people not only to survive, but also to create a unique culture in this icy hell. This culture was founded on a deep respect for nature and the wisdom of their ancestors. The names of these nameless heroes of the past are forever etched into the history of the harsh Canadian prairies. The story of the Cree's survival in the harshest of winters is a triumph of human ingenuity and willpower. They turned the hostile elements into their allies, using snow for warmth and frost for storing supplies. Every action they took was carefully calculated. Every detail of daily life was governed by strict rules of energy conservation. Suggest topics in the comments for future videos that you'd like to see on our channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new explorations of survival history. The long winter always came to an end, giving way to the timid warmth of spring. The icy crust on the roofs of the earthen houses began to melt slowly under the sun's rays. The cold wind died down, bringing the sounds of nature awakening back to the prairie. The tribe emerged from their shelters to greet a new day after long months of darkness. A crimson spring dawn slowly lit up the endless, snow-covered prairie.